everyone, and welcome back to the Village People. In this video we're going to, as per the poll's results, take a look at the Yamas, a humanoid race of serpent folk. We're going to take a look at their culture, their history, and what makes them unique as a playable race for D&D 5e. So without further ado, let's take a look at the Yamas. The Yamas are a race of humanoid serpentkin. Once the unwilling captives of the Yuan-Ti, these people suffered for centuries as subjects of cold and cruel experiments to advance the human condition towards more serpentine features. In time, these once captured humans, after undergoing a number of changes to their physiology, began to hatch their own escape plan, finding a way to escape their servitude and experimentation. One by one, groups of Yuan-Ti kingdoms began to fall as the highly intelligent and calculating Yuan-Ti were seemingly no match for the cooperative and intelligent Yamas that had begun to very strategically eradicate entire clutches of young Yuan-Ti broods. Forced out under the threat of death, fleeing for their lives, with many of their kin dying as they get caught, the Yamas then began to leave these settlements in droves, forming their own communities in the deep secluded jungles of their homeland. The Yuan-Ti, learning from their mistake, decided to lean more and more towards the serpentine than humanoid, and take a different approach to the creation of more serpent folk than the Yamas had been so far, finding humanity and the warmth within that allows for cooperation on kind of an emotional level to be more and more dangerous. And so they ended up doing the first step is to remove the emotional attachment. From a cultural perspective, Yamas' culture are highly influenced by their calculating nature as serpentkin. While they are not as cold as their Yuan-Ti counterparts, they are almost always cognizant of any of the variables at play in many a social situation. This calculating nature, as well as the human elements that remain within them to allow them to remain warm and supportive and, at the very least, empathic, has allowed them to become adept social manipulators without pushing things too far. So they can tend to understand and be calculating and understand what must be done and exactly how to do what they need to do. This, in an effect, for any detractors, would lead to them being called sociopaths, but there is very clearly a emotional attachment that these creatures do still have as a human side, this kind of last vestige of humanity within them. They do have the ability to empathize with whoever they're speaking with and know that even though something is the correct option, kind of has a calculating nature, that it's not the best time to do this. And so they kind of can be somewhat distant from saying anything that would be hurtful. And so many people tend to get along with the Yamas as they find them to be amicable and supportive and kind people. Peaceful and simple in nature, these communities work with their neighbors to ensure peace as much as possible, establishing cooperative relationships whenever possible to benefit both the Yamas tribe and the other communities around them. They're basically within the surrounding communities. If you have a Yamas tribe within the area, you see them as a tribe of good people. If anything, you see them as maybe a little bit weird, but it's not their fault. Their story is well enough known that they were not specifically choosing to have this lifestyle or this physiology. So they understand that this is no kind of sin of their own. They are a cursed people. And so this curse, while you must be wary of it and be aware of it, is something that allows them to push against what's their dark side. And so Yamas will be very aware of how they are perceived, be very aware of how this curse may be portrayed, and work to kind of work against that and prove themselves to be good and just people. And this reputation over time has kind of become built to the point where you know you can trust the Yamas, and there is more going on, but they will handle that. You can handle your own business. The Yamas culture, however, is not actually entirely peaceful. Should the need arise, collections of Yama soldiers and guards can make for extremely formidable fighting forces. And so there are plenty of stories where a entire group around them from the Yamas, maybe a city or a township, is under attack that they have cooperative efforts with. And they can send a number of their kind of Yamas guard because calculating nature says we should kind of support our relationship with these people and back them up. And so there are plenty of different jungle threats that these Yamas have come by and aided in the repelling or kind of support of their communities around them. They are extremely powerful fighting forces and extremely hardy with very kind of variable skills and extreme constitution and kind of survivability, which means that they're very hardy soldiers. Should you be fighting some sort of a monstrosity, they are very capable. So what makes the Yamas unique as a homebrew race to play? The Yamas kind of have the following traits by default, and they gain additional traits based on kind of a sub-race choice, which is not necessarily a sub-race, but kind of like that. Due to your serpentine form, you benefit from fast reflexes and a protective layer of scales for a majority of your body, at least the lower portion of it. You gain a +2 to your dexterity score and a +1 to your constitution. You also, as kind of you end up having an option here, have a serpentine nature. Now that serpentine nature is what I would call a sub-race, but it doesn't necessarily tie in that way. As a Yamas, you may choose one of the following serpentine natures to highlight your physiology. These natures are not necessarily a sub-race variant, as kind of the Yamas culture descended from a number of different Yuan-Ti tribes, and each of these Yuan-Ti tribes ended up coming to create Yamas with different color or pattern scales. And these kinds of color patterns are the loose association of tribes. And so these clans of color are how you can tell what clan a Yamas is from. As they intermingle and breed and cooperate, you can have different patterns or different mixtures of color, but the color is what ends up determining the exact kind of race within the Yamas culture. And you can have different scale types within the same color. So it's not necessarily a sub-race so much as it's a feature. This feature allows you to highlight your serpentine nature and lean into what kind of snake person do you want to be. You can have Venom, for example. If you choose Venom, whenever you make an unarmed strike, you can add a number of d6 equal to your Constitution modifier as poison damage to the attack. You may do this a number of times per long rest equal to your Constitution modifier. Sorry, not Constitution modifier, proficiency bonus. Now, this is kind of the reflection of your ability to have these foldable fangs and bite into something to deliver a venom dose. Now, you can have different colors with the venom dose and different other effects, but ultimately this venom dosage is something that's kind of found across many, or if not all, of the Yamas cultures. There's also constriction. When you attempt to grapple a creature, you have advantage on that grapple attempt. Targets have disadvantage on attempts to break the grapple on subsequent turns. And then additionally, you may deal bludgeoning damage equal to your strength modifier at the start of each of your turns, requiring no special action. This is just reflected of the fact that you have a strong and powerful body, very specifically kind of like a constrictor snake or boa constrictor or other kind of boids within that family. They have the trend to lean on constriction to kind of grapple down and hold something down and squeeze it to death until it's finally not a threat anymore. There is also serrated scales and smooth scales, but serrated scales are kind of the rough-scaled viper equivalent, if you ever kind of look up one of those here. Creatures that hit you with an unarmed strike suffer piercing damage equal to your Constitution modifier. So, sorry, any monks out there. Additionally, though, creatures that are grappling you suffer this damage at the start of each of their turns, as well as when you attempt to break the grapple. This means that sometimes being grappled isn't the worst thing. So when something grabs you, it may not want to try to eat you just on the basis of that you are a hard pill to swallow with many kind of jagged, sharp edges. Finally then, the smooth scale variety. You have advantage to avoid the grappled condition based on how kind of small and lithe your frame is, as well as the scales that you have, making you a little bit more slippery. And additionally, you gain proficiency with the acrobatics skill. Your movement also increases by 10 feet, kind of reflecting how your actual kind of small, thin snake scales allow you to be a little bit faster and a little bit more slippery when it comes to actual combat. Regardless of whatever scale type you choose, you do also gain 2 or more traits. You have Toxin Resiliency. Your serpentine form and the history of your kind's captivity to the Yuan-Ti granted you a more robust immune system. You are resistant to poison and have advantage to avoid the poison condition. And then finally, the last survivability feature is the Shed Skin feature. Your serpentine form allows you greater resiliency and aids in your own recovery time. During a short or long rest, you may spend 1 hour shedding your skin. When you choose to do this, you may regain hit dice equal to your Constitution modifier with a minimum of 1. Basically, you have the ability to rapidly gain hit points back by using the hit dice that you can recover. There aren't too many. Typically, when you take a short rest, you can spend your hit dice, and when you take a long rest, you regain half of your total hit dice. It means that you kind of have a limited resource, and you have to be very careful to take long rests as opposed to short rests. What this means is that you have the ability to potentially earn quite a bit of these and have a greater survivability chance by healing more rapidly. And so the way that this skill is intended as a class feature is you spend 1 hour shedding your skin during a short rest, which if you're playing at the table could be 30 minutes to an hour or whatever it would be, whatever your DM rules, and you shed your skin. During this time, you can spend whatever hit dice that you currently have, and at the end of that short rest, you have regained hit dice. You can't use them on that rest unless you continue to take another short rest afterwards. But you can choose to say, you know what, I'm going to, spend all of my hit dice and try to gain maybe 5 back. And then you have the ability to lean into the fact that, hey, I have more hit points that I can just kind of pull out of thin air to some extent. Because as you shed your skin, you shed whatever contaminants and damage that skin may have had. Any grievous wounds will still absolutely be translated on the rest of your form beneath that skin. But this is going to be easily reflected in the fact that you probably will not be healing for all of your hit points whenever you take this. It's just easier to recover. Thank you all for watching this episode on the Yamas. In this next video, we'll talk about whatever you choose in the poll. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!